An all-new Eye on the Bay in HD starts right now. He shaped popular culture.
That's it, right here. Disneyland.
The whole world knows his name, but few people know the man behind that name. Until now.
Everything Dad did, he wanted to share.
He was Grandpa.
A museum honoring Walt Disney could have been anywhere in the world, but Walt's own family built it here in the Bay Area.
Why not in Hollywood or Burbank?
Because everything's there.
The Walt Disney Family Museum opens this week in San Francisco, and Walt's daughter, Napa resident Diane Disney Miller, granted Eye on the Bay a sneak peek at her father's personal keepsakes, home movies, and artwork never seen outside the family.
This very well could be the earliest known drawing of Mickey Mouse.
Yeah.
Next, an Eye on the Bay special, a story 2 years in the making, from when it was an empty army barracks to the day Walt's train, the Lily Bell,
Little slower.
was wheeled into what is now a $110 million world-class museum honoring the man who framed our childhood.
Welcome to Eye on the Bay. I'm Dave Stelk, and this next half hour is a story about one of the world's greatest storytellers, Walt Disney. But this story begins with a simple question. What do you suppose is the heart or the center of all things Disney? Well, Disneyland, right? This, after all, is where Walt's dreams finally came true in three-dimensional reality. Or maybe the heart of Disney is at the famed Disney Studios in Burbank. This, after all, is where Walt and his animators literally shaped and colored popular culture. But maybe not. A case could be made that everything that was and is Walt Disney is about 300 miles north of here, in San Francisco. Just inside the Golden Gate and inside these gates of the centuries-old Presidio, not long ago, this old warehouse housed some of the world's most precious images and artifacts. Few people knew about this place, and those in the know referred to it in a kind of code. They called it the Gorgas Warehouse. Thousands of you drove right past the Gorgas Avenue warehouse on your way to and from the Golden Gate Bridge.
You see these unassuming buildings and you kind of drive in there and, is this the right address? And we kind of walk in.
Pixar's John Lasseter was among the few who were let inside.
My jaw hit the floor because this unassuming building had a collection of some of the most amazing artifacts of Walt Disney's life.
We thought at first that this would be where we do everything, in this warehouse.
I was lucky to get invited by a nice woman named Diane Miller to a personal space not open to the public. Everything in here belonged to Diane's dad.
Everything Dad did, he wanted to share.
Diane's dad was an uncle to many of us, Uncle Walt, Walt Disney. Now, over there along the wall are Dad's Oscars. He was awarded more of those than anyone in history. And over here is a prototype Autopia car, from an idea Dad had for a theme park. And in here are some odds and ends Dad had in his office drawer the day he passed away. And across the room, inside a locked safe, is a scrap of paper.
So this is a piece of old animation paper, it looks like, that was just lying around.
Creased and food-stained, it's a rough sketch of a mouse. Well, mice, actually.
And there's Minnie over there.
This very well could be the earliest known drawing of Mickey Mouse.
Yeah.
This launched an entire empire.
Yeah.
And here is Dad's prized possession, a steam locomotive Walt had built to ride on around his Los Angeles home. The Lily Bell was named for his wife, Lillian. After Walt passed away, Lillian bought a home in Napa. She passed on a few years ago, but Diane and her husband Ron still live in the area. They and their children run a winery.
But the family's located in the Bay Area. A lot of us are in the Bay Area right now.
Now, the family had to decide just what to do with that San Francisco warehouse. Maybe they'd open it to the public, build a museum. But where? They considered Los Angeles, of course.
We could have done it in Chicago, and there would have been a reason for that. He was born there.
Kansas City.
Went to school at Kansas City.
Kansas City was where Walt began making cartoons and films. But the family decided the museum would be in San Francisco. They were encouraged by family friend John Lasseter.
San Francisco has really become, a kind of one of the centers in the world for animation. The Pixar has been here. Lucasfilm is here. They're doing quite a bit of animation.
In fact, the Lucas Letterman Digital Arts Center is in the Presidio just down the street from the Gorgas warehouse. The family hired a museum consultant who told Walter Miller, Walt's grandson and president of the family foundation, the Gorgas garage wasn't going to cut it.
Her comment was, it's not a matter of getting them here, it's a matter of keeping them out. Because you put a name like Walt Disney on a museum and you're going to have a very large crowd. So
the family went to work on plans for a grand museum.
Okay, here's the model.
In a huge Presidio Army barracks, the family and a small staff began acquiring more rare Disneyana. Ironically, Walt didn't keep a lot of his own art, and the family decided to screen not just the Disney classics, but Walt's own home movies.
He wanted people to know he had a family. He was very much a family guy. And so that's a great part of our museum. And it was kind of difficult to first realize that maybe I should be showing my sister and me growing up to the whole world.
Diane was seized by a vision as vivid as anything her dad could dream up.
And then the concept of telling his story with the tools he worked with, film and sound and color and technology. Just always, Dad was always out there grasping it.
Still to come, how they turned a 100-year-old army barrack into one of the world's most technological and interactive museums, befitting a visionary named Walt Disney. Welcome back to Eye on the Bay, a behind-the-scenes tour through the Disney Family Museum.
Disney is a worldwide brand. CDs, toys, clothes.
Most of the time you just see the one named Disney. You don't see Walt Disney. And it's even kind of becoming more and more corporate.
Disney ice shows, Disney DVDs, Disney stores. Well, with so much Disney this and Disney that, some of us forgot who Disney was.
He was Grandpa.
Walt was their grandpa. But then again, he was everybody's grandpa.
I just recently was told by somebody that they loved my grandfather so much, and when he came on television, they would kiss the television. And I was so upset. I said, we kiss the television. Yes.
In some ways, Walt was like anyone else's grandpa.
We'd stay at his house when my parents were out of town.
They would even request them on weekends when we weren't going anywhere,
We'd go to the studio. We get to play on sets.
Except this grandpa's backyard was a Hollywood dream factory.
Yeah, so he'd take us to the studio on the weekends, and we'd hop in our cars and basically race around the studio lot while it was deserted.
They were Autopia cars, like the ones at Disneyland. This is the same Walt who countless other children visited on weekends on TV.
The man you saw there was truly him. He was not putting on any sort of performance at all. When he walked onto the set for those Sunday evening intros, that was the guy we knew.
It wasn't like he was this famous persona. I think that's one thing that he had, was he was sort of everybody's grandpa, everybody's uncle.
The Family Museum would put the Walt back in front of Disney.
They put the face back on Walt Disney.
What did this place used to be right here that I'm looking at?
These are a series of barrack buildings.
The U.S. Army built these barracks in the Presidio at the turn of the last century, around the time Walter Elias Disney was born in Chicago. When he was a teenager, Walt drove a Red Cross ambulance in World War I. Walt had a fascination with the military.
Where could you find something as wonderful to be a part of, the privilege to use this old building?
So Diane Disney Miller put on her hard hat and went to work turning an old army barracks into a tribute worthy of her legendary dad.
It's the location of a ramp that leads people from the upstairs down to the lower level.
Architect Jay Turnbull specializes in finding new uses for historic buildings.
You'll notice that all of the original historic windows are still present.
His designs called for a 77,000 square foot showplace.
This starts off with his childhood all along that wall.
While designers and construction crews worked on the building, Diane worked on the story.
It's a story of his life.
The story is important in Walt Disney's story.
Story was king with Walt Disney.
Pixar's John Lasseter was literally schooled by Walt's original animators.
Walt Disney invented the storyboard.
Even with all the high-tech wizardry, story is still king at Pixar, and story shall reign at the Walt Disney Family Museum.
And that's where the story of Mickey begins, right over there.
And the story will climax in what is now an empty canvas, this huge space in the barracks courtyard.
Once I referred to it as Christmas morning. Creative explosion.
Is this the end of the story
This
right
is the end
here?
of the story.
Next, how you can visit Disneyland without ever leaving the Bay Area.
Now we want you to share with us our latest and greatest dream.
Uncle Walt transformed a dusty orange grove in Anaheim into a fantasy land. Well, mini lands, actually.
But this is our entrance. This is the exit.
Walt's daughter would convert a dusty old army barracks into a world-class museum. And our cameras were the only ones allowed in from day one. This 100-year-old building will be a temple to technology.
And Walt always believed in technical advancement.
This is probably the most technologically advanced museum in existence.
Richard Benefield was hired away from Harvard University to be the Walt Disney Family Museum's first director. Here, Disney's art and life will be displayed using all the high-tech interactive technology nearby Silicon Valley could offer.
Basically setting a new standard for the way museums tell stories here.
And to tell that story, Walt's work, as well as his whimsical toys, were inducted as museum pieces.
It is. It's an artifact. One of a kind.
And the same is true for the Lily Bell.
It's truly to scale, everything.
Walter Miller, named for his grandpa, knows the Lily Bell legend.
He always loved trains.
So much so, Walt had a miniature locomotive constructed on the studio backlot. Fired by actual coal, Walt tried it out at work before shipping it to his home on Carrollwood Drive, where he built an elaborate layout known and worshipped by railroad buffs today as the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad.
And then after 3 or 4 years of running this, he thought, I've got to put this somewhere where more people can enjoy it and it's not in my backyard.
Walt ended up building a larger railroad around a bigger backyard.
Right here, Disneyland.
The family decided they would put Disneyland in their museum and hired Kerner Optical in Marin County to create a miniature version. The designers at Kerner are the same people who make many of the models used in big-budget Hollywood films. It took nearly as long to complete as the real Disneyland, a year.
Ooh. Oh, boy. Oh, wasn't that a dream?
The model was shipped to the Presidio and assembled the way Walt's Disneyland was assembled, with no detail spared, like this.
A little apartment.
And this is what Diane's talking about. Walt's private apartment. Now, very few people knew Walt kept an apartment above the Main Street firehouse. This National Geographic picture is the only one published of Walt enjoying his private pad with the people he cared about most.
I think he really enjoyed just sharing that on a more intimate level with us as his grandchildren.
But the best part of the apartment was the after hours or the before hours.
Wake up first thing in the morning and there'd be street sweepers out, and of course Grandpa'd get us out there almost immediately, and we'd walk down these empty streets. He basically walked through Disneyland as if it was his backyard.
The Disney Company has since made over the original apartment. It's still there, but you can see the original furniture at the Walt Disney Family Museum.
Next, his family answers the question, where is Walt Disney's final resting place? And a look at the finished museum.
Once I referred to it as Christmas morning, because you stand there and the ramp descends through all this stuff.
Like one of her dad's fairy tales, Diane's dream came true.
I said it's kind of like Christmas morning.
And the story begins.
My dad worked as a carpenter in the World's Fair buildings.
It's told in Walt's voice.
And he was doing that when I was born, December 5th, 1901.
In his 20s, Walt headed to Hollywood. This gallery speaks, again in his own voice, to Walt's opening a small studio with his brother and drawing a mouse. Mickey Mouse starred in the first ever sound cartoon. Walt and Mickey met fame.
This is the only gallery in the museum that's devoted to one film. This is the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs gallery.
But for all its interactive and colorful displays, this is not a whitewash, says museum director Richard Benefield. Did you feel pressure to sanitize anything?
Not at all. In fact, coming from an academic background, one of the first questions I asked the family was, are you going to tell the truth? Because I only wanted to be involved in an institution that had academic integrity at its core.
For years, the Disney studio hid Walt's smoking habit.
I can't recall him without a cigarette.
They don't hide it here.
This area represents the strike.
And the family chose to include a dark chapter in Walt's story.
Very low point.
When his animators revolted, Walt blamed communists.
You know, I was just in anguish for my daddy.
Seeing Walt Disney as a daddy, says the Disney family, is essential to knowing him as an artist.
Family was the whole idea. Entertainment for family. His films were oriented to family.
Which is why the museum is stuffed with home movies and pictures.
Well, I remember this day. And I remember he told me to bring the dog into the pool, and she wouldn't do it.
Walt was a man of simple tastes.
Liked canned food. He loved chili.
Who just happened to make a famous name for himself. The largest gallery is just big enough to represent Walt's final prolific years. Diane calls this room a creative explosion.
You're winding your way through this very exciting period. There's the video globe there. Here's the Lily Bell over here.
Walt conquered another medium, TV.
And it's just everything that happened. So much was going on.
And then there's Disneyland.
He just wanted to give something wonderful to people.
Walt was at his peak. He planned to build an even bigger theme park in a futuristic city in Florida.
We call it Epcot.
Then, in November 1966...
Thanksgiving was tough.
Yeah, it was very
gloomy.
The doctors found a spot on Walt's lung.
We knew what it meant, but no one talked about it.
The cancer spread quickly. Walt passed away on December 15th, 1966 in a hospital across the street from his studio. The world mourned.
Everyone knew your grandpa died. Everyone knew you couldn't hide with that. You know, it was so huge in our lives, but it was so huge in the world.
Funeral services will be private for the family only.
A public man's death was so private, some said Walt was cryogenically frozen. The rumor spread so wide it even got back to the family.
Is it true he's frozen? And I thought to myself, no, is your grandpa frozen? I thought, this is, how absurd.
The family allowed us to visit Walt's grave at Forest Lawn Cemetery in Los Angeles, the first time it's been revealed. So unless you're a die-hard conspiracy theorist or you just plain don't want to believe the Disney family, here lies Walter Elias Disney. So this, then, is the end of the story.
No, not really. This is the legacy. This is what goes on.
This is the final gallery.
The images will change constantly.
But it's not the end to Walt Disney's story. His studio lives on, and others do in his image.
Everything at Pixar is done in kind of the model of what Walt Disney did.
But it will never end.
So that will do it for this Eye on the Bay. And if you would like tickets to the Walt Disney Family Museum, log on to our website, where we have a direct link to their website. In the meantime, as Uncle Walt might say, here's hoping your dreams come true.
Promotional consideration provided by Southwest Airlines. A special thanks to the Miller family and the Walt Disney Family Foundation for rare home movies and pictures.